Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 227 has arrived, and good lord, I know I keep saying this, but almost every single chapter feels like Gege is just rug pulling us, and the series is just genuinely in such a crazy, unpredictable state right now. Like, you could have given your best guesses, and you still wouldn't have guessed Gojo was what he was even gonna do in this chapter. Like, we're really just shrinking domains now. Like, that shit is crazy shit right there. But you know what else is crazy? The fact that you haven't subscribed to this channel yet. Like, what the fuck is that, brother? Like, get it together. I suggest you subscribe to this channel for all of your Jujutsu Kaisen juicy content needs, because trust me, we've got a lot of content coming over the next couple of weeks, and in just 1 week we have the Jujutsu Kaisen season 2 dropping, so I suggest you subscribe to the channel. But this chapter picks up where we left off in the previous one, with Gojo having just blasted Sukuna away with a quickfire reversal red, and after him healing his own case technique. Now, something that Yuta points out here in this chapter we actually thought to be impossible, but Yuta talks about how the case technique burnout after a domain expansion is an entirely different matter from just physical damage, and he compares it to when a machine overheats and isn't quite broken and you just need to sort of wait for it to cool down. And honestly, I'm genuinely a big fan of how Gege is sticking to the basics within this fight. We saw earlier in the series how Gojo was explaining to Yuji cased energy and case technique in a similar way to how electricity flows and runs through motors and appliances, so I'm kind of happy that that is still a thing. We're just sticking to the simple basics here. And I also do want to point out how, even though it's already been established that Gojo is a bad teacher, the fact that Yuta is here essentially learning things from this fight could come up in a big way. I mean, I know he looks like he's panicking and shitting his fucking pants right now, and I really don't want my man Yuta anywhere near Sukuna, but it could come up in a big way here. I mean, he is the second one in line after Gojo, you know, so, you know, he's still got a lot to learn, even though he is still young, which he also touches on in the next page, with Maki saying on how is Yuta that reverse case technique can repair damage but can't cool an overheated technique. And Yuta replies with, well, yeah, that's what I thought, but it seems my understanding is completely incorrect here. Which again, as I just said, Yuta could possibly use this same reverse case technique to replenish his copy technique and even extend his time with Rika. If he got Rika to use RCT on his body, he would essentially just be recycling cased energy throughout the fight. We know Rika has unlimited cased energy. Yuta already has an astounding amount, so he could basically create this constant self-healing machine and use Rika as a somewhat discount form of Limitless and the Six Eyes. It's very possible, but again, the potential's there. Yuta does go on to show concern right now how Gojo might be doing something absolutely completely unbelievable right now, but we do cut back to Gojo and Sukuna, with Gojo standing on the very edge of Sukuna's domain, taunting him and saying, you know, can you expand the range of your domain? And as Sukuna does this, Gojo opts for a second domain clash with Sukuna, which is absolutely insane. However, this time it's different. Higuruma points out that Gojo's actually switched the external and internal conditions for his barrier, meaning Gojo on the fly learned to reinforce his domain from external attacks here. And we see Yuji getting all excited about this, and Kusakabe basically saying, you know, this is unfair. How can Gojo just do all of this shit on the fly? But like, when you're someone like Gojo and Sukuna, you can do whatever the fuck you want. Gojo's domain completely covers Sukuna's domain, and again, the way that this panel looks, it's drawn as if Gojo's domain is like a whirlpool. When you compare it to the first domain clash between Gojo and Sukuna, Sukuna's domain had a way more dominating presence. However, this time with this panel, it feels like Gojo's was way more enveloping, should I say. But Gojo and Sukuna start throwing hands within this domain here, and again, these guys seem to be having an absolute blast. This is where Gojo realizes Sukuna is actually using his domain amplification at the same time as having his domain expanded, which again is actually insane. And Gojo seems genuinely impressed and shocked by this, which I will say, outside of being hit by an attack, this is the first time we've seen Gojo actually be shocked by Sukuna's use of Jujutsu techniques within a fight here. And the fact that he is like, yo, are you actually serious right now? Like, is there anything this motherfucker can't do? I mean, I personally think one of the major reasons that Gojo is shocked by this happening at the same time is due to the fact that Sukuna doesn't have the Six Eyes or the Limitless to compensate for technique burnout and just constantly recycling cased energy. He's simply doing all of this from his own cased energy reserves, whereas Gojo's Six Eyes obviously allows him to have precise control over his cased energy to do things like this, but Sukuna doesn't have that extra help, basically. So Sukuna doing this outside of not having the Six Eyes and the Limitless with just his own cased energy manipulation control and his own reserves is crazy powerful. This is where we see Gojo thinking and explains how, while the domain amplification, you cannot use this technique that is etched into your body once the chaos technique is granted to a domain. It's a whole new ball game. But then continues to just swing punches at Sukuna, stating, well, who gives a shit? I mean, can we just take a fucking moment to sit down and soak up how much that these two dudes are just simply not bothered by anything? Like, we have Sukuna, who's had his domain deployed for a lengthy amount of time right now and is fighting someone who is healing it, right? He doesn't care. He just carries on. And then we have Gojo, who's on the opposite side, witnessing Sukuna use unreal uses of chaos energy manipulation and control, and proceeding to just say, who gives a shit, and start swinging at him anyway. Like, these two motherfuckers are seriously on another fucking level. It's insane. But after this little exchange here, we see Gojo realizing that Sukuna actually turned off the sure hit within Gojo's domain barrier, which is where we get a little cameo from Kenjaku here, who mentions that the only ones unaffected by Gojo's domain are Gojo and those who touch Gojo himself. And we see this in this panel that Sukuna is purposefully leaning himself back to back against Gojo here, and we see Sukuna mentioning how he's already experienced Gojo's domain firsthand, and we see in a little flashback here of the time Gojo used his domain way back when to fight against Jogo. And the fact that Gege is using callbacks like this and staying consistent in this fight in the series is genuinely wild. Like, I genuinely implore all of you to go back and read the story where Yuji, Gojo, or Sukuna is involved, and I guarantee you're going to find some hints and just little things and moments that are going to show you what's going to happen throughout this fight, because the running theme throughout this fight right now is showing us things that have already happened, but using them in incredibly unique and interesting ways here. But this is where the narrator kicks in and says how in order to destroy Gojo Satoru's domain from the outside, Sukuna expanded his effective range and increased the power of his binding vow further than he did in Shibuya. Using a binding vow, Sukuna managed to further increase the power of his domain outside of Gojo's domain by removing the sure hit guarantee inside of the domain, while also simultaneously keeping himself from infinite void by constantly touching Gojo Satoru directly. Once again, Gojo Satoru's domain collapses, and honestly, the fact that Sukuna was able to remember all of this information from that long ago is unreal. I can't, like Sukuna's fight IQ is genuinely through the roof for that player, like genuinely. But Sukuna then taunts Gojo by repeating what Gojo said to him by saying, let's take it from the top then, eh? And honestly, the banter between these two is genuinely insane. It's one of the most fun fights within the series, and I can't stress that enough, because there's people out there in the fandom, they're calling this fight boring, and that is crazy insane to me, because when you look at all of the other fights that have happened within the series, they've all been super serious, at least on one side or another. We haven't really had a fight where two of them are genuinely just enjoying their time here, and that is the case with what's going on here. These two are genuinely just having fun, and you can see it, and it's just good to read. It feels like a nice change of pace, but it also kind of does make you forget that the literal fate of the world is at stake here. So there's also that. But we cut back over to Yuji and the gang, who are shocked by this, and we see Kusakabe saying it looks like Sukuna changed the conditions of his domain also to match Gojo's and then also collapse it, which is where we see Kashimo saying to Hikari how if Gojo dies, I'm going out there to fight Sukuna next, and don't you stop me. And I once again just want to say, I keep saying it, I am genuinely shocked at Kashimo, how he's been this patient. He's been, like, it is smart. It's a smart play by him, getting as much information from this fight as he can and be as possible before he fights Sukuna if he gets the chance to. We've seen multiple times in this series right now sorcerers who sit back and actually plan out their attacks rather than just mindlessly going out to fight often do the best, and the biggest example of this within the series is obviously Kenjaku. Like, the dude has been plotting everything, like literally everything. I mean, he's probably plotted some of your lives for all we know, you know what I'm saying? But this also does dispel the theories that Kashimo going out in the middle of the fight and interrupting the fight between Gojo and Sukuna. He's actually just gonna wait until either Gojo dies or he wins, and he's probably, I imagine if Gojo wins, he probably might want to fight Gojo here, but as you know, he's actually being patient, and that is shocking to me overall. But we cut back to Gojo, who once again is standing within Sukuna's domain and surviving. However, this time he's using a technique that I called a while back in a previous video, where I mentioned how Gojo most likely can use a technique called Falling Blossom Emotion, which Gojo then goes on to say how he learned when he was a child. But I haven't, he hasn't used it much since he mastered his domain, and then he goes on to say, not bad, right? Now, there's two things here that I want to get into and break down here. One is Gojo saying how he learned this when he was a kid, which is crazy. This technique is a secret technique passed down within the big three families, and Gojo learned this when he was a kid, meaning he had this and was probably more behind his arsenal when he fought against Toji as a teenager, which also goes to show just how good Toji was, because he actually beat Teen Gojo once, but then we also know what happened after that. But anyway, my second point here is that Gojo also mentions how he's mastered his domain. Now, I honestly think that's an interesting statement, and probably one of the, I think, first and only times that I'm actually going to argue with the text here that is written. But I would be willing to bet that Gojo doesn't mean that he's mastered his domain here. He's actually just being arrogant. Say this because Gojo, being the strongest in the verse, is not going to have many times, he's not going to have many opponents or opportunities to master this domain. And I say this because right now, he's fighting against Sukuna, and I would be willing to bet that right now Gojo is learning a lot from fighting Sukuna, and likewise for Sukuna. The pair of these two have most likely never had a fight like this where they've both been pushed this far. I imagine Sukuna has never ever fought someone who's had a motherfucker run around in his own domain and heal his domain expansion. So yeah, I imagine right now that these two are both looking at each other like, yeah, this is kind of weird. We're kind of going around in circles here. Something's got to give at some point. But we see everyone freaking out, asking what Fallen Blossom emotion is, and Kusakabe then goes on to explain how it is a technique that is passed down within the big three families, and it's an anti-domain technique, and it's an application of cursed energy that automatically repels anything you touch. I theorized that a video a while back would be a decent counter to Sukuna's domain based off the fact that we know Sukuna's cleave and dismantle can be deflected. We saw this because Mahoraga did the same thing way back when in the Shibuya instance, which also does point out how Gojo is still taking damage here. However, it's not as much as it was within the previous chapter, as the output from his Fallen Blossom emotion isn't strong enough to rival a domain expansion. But again, like I theorized, I would say if Gojo hadn't just used a domain expansion here, he could possibly amp the output of this Fallen Blossom emotion to match the domain. However, that's just a theory, but I would be willing to bet that that was correct. But this is where it gets even crazier, because we see Gojo using a third domain expansion. My man just said another one right here. After once again using RCT to heal his burnt out technique, he activates a domain expansion. However, this time he makes the barrier massive. He makes it big, and we see Sukuna's domain just here. I said in the leaks video and on Kyle Breeze's stream that I wasn't sure if Sukuna had reactivated a second domain because we couldn't quite see it because of the leaks and the quality, but no, Sukuna has had the same domain active this entire time, and Gojo has re-rolled his now 3 times, so I just wanted to correct myself on that one. But we see the edge of this barrier cracking, and Kurara panics, saying, doesn't it work again? But no, Gojo is actually shrinking the domain's barrier to an incredibly small size, which I'm going to keep it a stack. Seeing this was wild, because I don't think anyone had Gojo sealing Sukuna with himself inside our Pokeball-sized domain expansion here on their bingo card, because that shit is crazy. But I do have a minor crackpot theory here that I'll briefly touch on. I haven't quite worked out the kinks of all this detail yet because I'm not quite smart enough, but I'll give you the gists of it. And it's that Gojo's domain doesn't actually really reflect his curse technique. Well, I mean, it does and it doesn't. Every domain that we've seen so far has reflected the curse technique in some way. However, Gojo's main curse technique is limitless, and we've seen him using red, blue, and purple, which all have some form of space manipulation or matter manipulation in some way or shape or form. Well, his domain expands, and he uses that space manipulation that then turns into an info dump, basically into an information dump that fries the brain, which to me doesn't quite make sense. It does and it doesn't. But Gojo using a domain that would give him complete control over the barrier and everything within inside of that barrier makes more sense to me, given his abilities and what he uses. I think Gojo's domain here might be completely unbreakable for Sukuna's shrine to even harm it. He shrunk the domain right down, and he might even continue to go smaller with this. Maybe something similar to Yugi's black hole is happening right before our eyes right now. I'm not entirely sure of the physics of it all, but that is the general basis for the theory here. I'm going to do some more research into this and see if I can work it out and put it together, because a lot of the most powerful techniques within the series are all based off like real kind of sci-fi science concepts, if you would like. I can't really quite explain it properly, but I'm cooking something up in my brain. I can feel the cogs of crazy crackpot theory turning, you know what I'm saying? But that is everything from me. Overall, I would score this chapter a solid 8 out of 10. Domain battles out of the wazoo, and something crazy and new that we've never ever seen before. But that is everything from me. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more Jujutsu Kaisen content, as it always does help me out. And as always, I will catch you guys all in the next one. Much love. Big kisses. Peace.